How do you start? I can't really answer that for you, but I think you can, because starting is really a matter of saying no to fear.
Welcome to The Portfolio Life with Jeff Goins. This is the podcast that helps you to pursue work that matters, make a difference with your art, and discover your true voice. I'm your host, Jared Easley. Today, Jeff will continue to answer questions from listeners that were posted on the Goins Writer Facebook page. But first, this episode is brought to you by Jeff's latest book, The In-Between. The In-Between is a call to accept the importance that waiting plays in our lives. You are invited to pick up your copy of The In-Between by going to goinswriter.com/inbetween. And now, Jeff Goins.
Jeff, the question we have today is from Gregory S. Gold, and he writes, I'd love to know how to get started.
Well, that is a great question. And I just want to congratulate Gregory on making that decision in the first place, because I think a lot of people don't even get to that point where they're actually ready to start. They are still stuck in the dreaming phase. And I think there is a crucial difference between dreaming and starting. And I'd love to illustrate that with a story from my long list of girls who I liked, but, rejected me. So there was this girl in high school named Katie, and Katie was a cheerleader. And we had physical education together. And my junior year, I still had never been on an actual date with an actual girl, despite many, many failed attempts. So I liked Katie, and I thought she liked me back. I mean, she flirted with me at PE, and, I got this idea into my head that I was going to ask her out. And so I just sort of fixated on that for a while and dreamt about it and thought about it and stood in front of the mirror and envisioned myself asking her out and practiced really hard and decided, okay, I'm going to do this. And so one day after school, and, a fair amount of stalking to, know where she would be after school, I waited for her as she was finishing up cheerleading practice. And I stepped into the gymnasium where she was finishing up her practice. And I saw her across the gym. And I immediately turned around and ran away because I was afraid. And so I started walking to my car. And as I was walking to my car, I stopped myself and I said, what are you doing? And I told myself, you're really going to regret not doing this. This might end in failure, but you're going to regret not trying. And so I took a deep breath. I summoned up what little courage I had. I turned around, I stepped back into the gym, and I marched across that gym. And it took about 30 seconds to go from one end of the gym to the other. And I walked up to her. She was talking to some friends. I kind of awkwardly interjected, and I just bumbled out a bunch of words, which I'm not even sure, what I was saying. I was probably speaking German or something. And she looked at me with this curious look on her face, and she didn't say anything. And for a second, I was like, oh man, maybe I really was speaking German. And she finally opened her mouth, and she said, I'd love to. And then she turned around and walked away. And she took a few steps, and then she stopped, and she turned back around. And she said 3 words that I'll never forget. She said, it's about time. And she winked at me, and she walked away. And honestly, that date didn't turn out so well. It wasn't that great of a date. But something happened to me as a result of making that courageous choice. And which is that, I had dozens of no's from girls before then, but then I got one yes, and it made it 100 times easier to ask the next girl out, who did say yes, and I ended up dating her for 18 months. And, I realized that the way that we build courage doing things that scare the crap out of us is by taking action now, being decisive now, doing something that could fail, but could also succeed. And it's not so much the result, but the actual doing of it, of facing our fears. By the time I had committed to walking across that gym, I'd already won. I'd already beat myself. I'd already pushed back my own personal resistance to do the thing that I was afraid to do. And so by the time I was talking to Katie, in a way I'd already won, because I wasn't going to let fear drive me away from the things that I wanted out of life. And if I had just kind of ran to my car, as I'd done many times before out of fear, facing some sort of decision, I would have stayed stuck where I was, at least a little bit longer. But what I learned from Katie is the things that we hesitate to do, the things that we spend too much time dreaming about, not enough time starting. Some of those things, whether it's asking that person out or starting that dream career or just spending more time doing something you love, often when we step into it, I certainly found this when I started writing, the response that we get either from that person or just from the work that we're doing is this sense of, it's about time. And that phrase has been ringing in my ears ever since I started writing, really seriously, doing the work of a writer. And so, how do you start? I can't really answer that for you, but I think you can, because starting is really a matter of saying no to fear. And if you say no to fear, you're saying yes to stuff that you're not really sure what you're saying yes to. I didn't really know what the date with Katie would hold, but the prospect of it, and the fact that I didn't quite know, that excited me. And I was okay with not knowing. And that's really what starting is it's not ending, it's not finishing, it's just beginning something new. And so how do you start? I think you choose to face your fears. You resolve to make a decision, even if it scares you. And, you follow through with it. And the interesting thing is that the more decisions we make, and starting really is a choice, the more decisive we become. And so if you're not decisive, if you struggle to start things, the best way that you can do it, that you can get better at that, is to do it more. And I know it sounds, sort of like a chicken and egg thing. Well, how do I become more decisive? I decide more. But it really is that. I mean, it really is a matter of creating habits. And what I found with Katie and with writing and with so many other decisions in my life, I had to follow the process that all decisions follow, which is I had to first commit to deciding at all. I had to essentially decide to decide, which sounds, again, kind of chicken and egg, but it's true. I mean, a lot of people face choices and they go, I'm just going to sort of waver. And because there are a lot of details or a lot of potential failure, they never really actually make a decision. They just kind of go, I wanted to do this. I wanted to try this new restaurant, but I also wanted to try this one. And then they just procrastinate and they run out of time because they're afraid of making the wrong decision. And I can say from experience, the wrong decision is no decision at all. So you really have to decide to decide. I'm going to make a decision here. Even if it's the wrong one, I'm going to do it. And then you have to decide how to decide. So when it comes to starting anything, a passion, a business, a relationship, you have to decide, how is this going to work? What are the parameters? How am I going to make this decision? How am I going to decide this person is right for me? Or how am I going to decide which nonprofit I'm going to quit my job and go work for? Or, what child to adopt in India? Or, what kind of book to write? You have to create those parameters. You've got to decide, okay, these are the ways that I'm going to make this decision. And once it passes through that filter, I am going to make the decision. I'm not going to let the multitude of options overwhelm me. And then, the last part of making decisions is actually doing it, which sounds simple enough, but is actually the hardest part. So once you've committed to doing it, you've decided to decide, you've decided how you're going to decide. So is this going to be a snap decision? Or are you going to spend 3 weeks and, have some sort of deadline after which you're going to make that decision? Or are you, going to ask advice from people or whatever? But once you've decided how you're going to decide, now it's time to actually do it and follow through. And so in the earlier illustration, what that looked like for me was I'm walking out the door, tail tucked between my legs, running away out of fear. I stopped and I turned around, and that was my first decision. And then I entered the room and I saw Katie, and I thought, I'm going to walk up there and just ask her. So that's me deciding how to decide. And then, and as I'm walking across the gym, heart racing, at every moment I could have still turned around, and the decision wasn't actually made until I walked up, tapped her on the shoulder, and blurted out whatever I said, possibly in some version of, Swiss German or something. I just can't remember exactly what I said. It wasn't until then that I had really finally followed through and made the decision. And at that point, you've won. You've started. You've done something new that you've never done that scares you. And regardless of the consequences, I guarantee that the next time you face a decision, the next time you have an opportunity to start something, to do something, you will do it better and you will do it bolder, because more decisions beget more decisions. More starting begets more starting. More bravery begets a braver outlook and approach to life. And for somebody who for years was scared to do the wrong thing, I've realized, for the most part, there is no wrong thing. Certainly we can do wrong things. We can make bad decisions. But for those of us who are hesitant to do things that scare us, I think it's better to err on the side of trying some things that could fail and seeing what we can learn from them. And there is this natural momentum that's created when you do that. And it makes you a bolder, more decisive, more discerning person over time. And so, again, the worst thing that you could do is nothing. And I love that line from Braveheart, where William Wallace, Mel Gibson's character, is talking to his best friend, and he's debating whether or not he should go to this meeting that the Scottish lords, I guess, have invited him to. And he's kind of struggling because this guy, Robert the Bruce, he's not really sure what side he's on. He's kind of a politician, and he respects him, but he also, doesn't completely trust him. And so this guy invites William, and William's standing on some Scottish highlands, and he's talking to his friend, and they're telling him, don't go, because if you go, you could die. It's a trap. And he looks at his friend and he goes, what happens if I don't go? If we don't do this? And he says, what? He says, nothing. And the truth is, the reality is, he goes, and it is a trap, and he dies, and they kill him. But in his death, in his boldness to do things that could be scary, that could end in failure, he inspires, an entire country to follow his lead, his bravery, his courage. So was it the right choice? I don't know. And I don't think that he cared at that point. What he knew was, we can't keep running, we can't keep hiding, we have to make a decision. And the fear of failure was diminished by the fear of nothing happened. And I think that we give failure too much credit. Failure is just a means to success. And sometimes it can hurt. It can lead to all kinds of disaster. But even in the case of William Wallace, it did eventually lead to success, albeit a surprising kind.
Warren Baldwin is interested in learning more about writing an ebook.
Well, good for him. I think that writing an ebook, and I kind of took a cue from Seth Godin, who's kind of a far away mentor to me in a lot of ways. And I saw Seth, anytime he had an idea that he wanted to spread, he would often write an ebook and then just give it away for free to his audience. And I love that. I mean, I think that's a great way to capture attention. It's also a great way if you want to build an email list or something, or bring more attention to your work. Writing something, not just a blog post or a Facebook update or an email newsletter, but some sort of long-form communication, a deep dive into a particular subject. In other words, a book, even a short book, is one of the best ways to get an idea out there, because it takes people time to read a book. And I find myself, even now in the information age, asking people, hey, have you read this book? Much more than saying, hey, did you read this blog post or this article on the New York Times? I mean, I say those things sometimes, but much more often I say, hey, did you read this book? Because books change me more often and in more significant ways than a short form article that I read in 5 minutes. So good for you, Warren. The first step to writing an ebook is, as we just talked about with starting, is deciding to do it. And the second step is figuring out how you're going to do it. And the third step is actually doing it, much like, making decisions. And how I do that is, because I've written a few of them, is, the first thing that I do is I decide, okay, I am going to do this. I'm going to commit to it. And I'm going to figure out whatever I don't know in order to, actually do it. And so once I've done that, I have to decide exactly what I'm going to write about. And one of the ways that I do that is by asking people, what do you want to hear about? Or, hey, I'm thinking about doing this thing. What are some questions that you have? And I just try to get some interest going and try to get some feedback, which helps me figure out exactly what I'm going to do. And then at that point, I start outlining it. And I don't really write anything without some basic outline. I do a lot of free writing, but when it comes to structured writing, when it comes to actually publishing something, I've got to have an outline, even if it's just 1, 2, 3, these are my points, and now I'm going to fill, all the gaps in. So you got to create an outline, and then lastly, you got to do it. And I think when people talk about, writing an ebook, often the question that I hear is, I don't know how to do that. I don't know, the technical things that I need to do to make that happen. And really, I mean, yeah, I get it. Like that feels overwhelming, but that's kind of, the easiest part. But if that feels overwhelming to you, there are some really easy ways to do it. You can just write a Word document, and you can, on a Mac, export that as a PDF, or if you're on a PC, there are lots of, doc to PDF converters that are free. You can literally Google, Word doc to PDF, and you'll get lots of free programs where you can or you can upload your Word document to a website and get it as a PDF. The reason I like it as a PDF is because that's basically a locked document that people can't edit, and it just looks a little bit more legit than, passing around a Word document. You can also use a program like a slideshow program like PowerPoint or Keynote, and then you can, export or save those as PDFs, and you've got a nice little format. Or you can take that little Word document, you can go to Amazon.com and sign up for their Kindle Direct Publishing program, which is at kdp.amazon.com. And you can literally upload that Word document that you wrote, and they will convert it. Amazon will convert it into a Kindle document and put it on Amazon.com, and people can buy your book from you. And that happens within 24 to 48 hours. So, 10, 15, 20 years ago, it took you, 2.5 years to publish a book. You had to get an agent, they had to find a publisher, and then they had to, give you a contract, and then you spent 6 months writing the thing, and they spent, another 6 months editing it and getting it ready for publication. And then it took, at least another 6 to 12 months to actually get it out there and for people to buy it. And now, within, over the weekend, you can take something that you've written, put it on Amazon, and have a self-published ebook that people are paying you for. Or you could take that, that same PDF and just, upload it to your website or put it on Dropbox.com and share that link with people, and they could download it for free, and your ideas could spread.
Tanya Hurst has a question. She wants to know what you're currently writing about.
Well, I'm currently writing about vocation, which is this word that we've lost touch with. I grew up hearing about, vocation in the context of like trade schools, vocational work. It was sort of like basic, often uneducated work that you do with your hands. And I think that's just a really terrible definition, because the root word of vocation, comes from the Latin vocare, which means calling. And I love this idea of work not just being something that we do to get a paycheck, but being this high calling, that we have this thing that we are compelled to do that is going to, make a difference in the world. And I believe that calling comes from God, but that's not just It's not just, it doesn't have context or connotation in a religious setting. I mean, lots of people, when they find their life's work, this thing that they know they were born to do, we often say, oh my gosh, you've found your calling. And that is just fascinating to me. And I've been reading a lot about it and writing about it because in many ways I feel like I've found my calling. And in some ways I feel like I'm still finding it. You know, it is this lifelong journey of not just doing one thing, but creating a whole portfolio of work. That is my calling. But the thing that scares me, the thing that really concerns me is for many years I didn't do this. And I could have spent my whole life not doing it, and my life would have been fine. And so the thing that really scares me is that I think many people are either missing or ignoring their callings because they don't know what to look for, or they're scared to make a decision or start something that could end in failure. And I believe everybody has some sort of calling, and that it is not just one thing, but it is a bunch of things that create a body of work, but it is an intentional choice to step into that work and do it. And you don't have to, but if you don't do it, the world will miss out. And so it's something that I'm dedicating, the next season of my life to helping other people do is to understand what a calling means, what it looks like, and how to step into it.
And won't you roll the dice so I can know?
Thank you for listening to this Q&A episode of The Portfolio Life with Jeff Goins. You are welcome to submit your question to Jeff by going to facebook.com/GoinsWriter. Your question may end up on a future episode of The Portfolio Life. You are welcome to visit Jeff's website, GoinsWriter.com, where you can learn more about writing, marketing, creative business ideas, and making a difference in the world. Thanks again for listening to the show.
Because I think a lot of people don't even get to that point where they're actually ready to start. They are still stuck in the dreaming phase. And I think there is a crucial difference between dreaming